Yolanda Reyes emptied that man's wastebasket for 11 years. 11, and on the morning this story really begins, Trevor Lund stepped over her vacuum cord without looking down. Didn't slow, didn't nod. He was on his phone, talking about a number with too many zeros in it, and his shoe caught the cord and yanked the machine an inch across the carpet. And he never once looked up to see whose hand was on the other end of it. Her hand. She didn't stop wiping the glass. She just watched him go, the way you watch weather. And here's the thing you need to understand before anything else. That woman knew his building better than he did. Better than anyone who worked there in the daylight. A few days later, in a conference room packed wall to wall, the head of HR stood up and said the words out loud. Whoever's walking our secrets out has after-hours access. Pull the cleaning contractors first. 14 executives nodded along like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. And Yolanda Reyes was right there, emptying the bin by the door, close enough to hear her own crew named as the first suspects, before a single question had been asked. 2 wounds in less than a minute, and not one person in that room felt the second one land. But that investigation had cameras, it had badge audits, it had forensic consultants who charged by the day, and men in good suits who spoke in acronyms. And none of them, not one, had what the night cleaner carried in her head. A map. A living map of every door in that tower. Of exactly whose badge lit up which reader at 2 o'clock in the morning, when the building was supposed to be empty, and wasn't. They were about to spend 9 days and a fortune looking everywhere, except at the one thing that could see in the dark. If you believe respect is earned in silence, this story is for you. I'm the voice you'll be riding with tonight, and before we go one step further, do me a small thing. Tap subscribe, because these are the stories the algorithm likes to bury. And leave me a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. Just the city. That's all. Now come with me, because it starts quiet, the way the true ones always do. Corvath Dynamics sat in Halstead Technology Park, out on the edge of Dublin, Ohio, where the office towers rise up out of what used to be soybean fields, glass, and gray stone. A fountain out front that ran until October. Inside, they made thermal systems, cooling plates, heat exchangers, the kind of quiet engineering that no ordinary person ever thinks about, but that keeps satellites from cooking themselves and keeps certain machines running that the government doesn't talk about much. Serious work. Serious money. And every night, after the last badge swiped out and the last laptop went dark, the building belonged to a crew of 4 people who mopped it and wiped it and emptied it and locked it back up before the sun came. Yolanda ran floors 2 through 6, 10 at night until 6 in the morning. She'd done it for 11 years, and in 11 years she had learned that building the way you learn a person you love. She knew which vent up on the 6th floor ticked when the heat kicked on, a soft little tick-tick-tick like a clock with a stutter. She knew the door on 4 never latched right, that you had to lift the handle a hair and lean, or it would sigh open behind you an hour later on its own. She knew whose office smelled of the same cologne every single night, sharp and green. The kind a man puts on in the morning and it's still hanging in the room at midnight. She knew which offices got cleaned and never used, and which ones looked clean and never were. She knew about the plant on 5, a little pothos in a green plastic pot on the windowsill outside the accounting suite, left behind by somebody who'd quit 2 winters ago. Nobody watered it. Nobody remembered it was alive. Yolanda filled a paper cup at the break room sink every 3rd night and gave it a drink and turned it a quarter so it grew even toward the glass. It had put out a new leaf that spring. She was the only one who knew. It was, if you want to know the truth, one of the happiest secrets of her week. That was the shape of her. She did the work right when no one was checking, because no one was ever checking, and doing it right anyway was the whole of her dignity. She wasn't bitter about being unseen. She'd made a kind of peace with it. She figured nobody would ever ask her a single thing about that building, so she almost never offered. She just knew. She held it all quietly, the way some people hold a house key worn smooth, and she assumed she always would. On the crew with her was a boy named Marcus Bello, 20 years old. He had a baby at home, a little girl, and a girlfriend studying nights same as him, and he was taking 2 classes at the community college and falling asleep over the textbooks in the break room between floors. Yolanda watched over him without ever saying she was doing it. She'd bring an extra sandwich and say she wasn't hungry. She'd take the heavy floors so he could sit 10 minutes with his book. She called him Mijo when she forgot to be careful about it. He called her Miss Yolanda and meant it. That job was the ground under his family's feet, and both of them knew it. And neither of them said it out loud, because some things you don't say. For 11 years, that was the whole story. A woman, a building, a boy, a plant. And it might have stayed that way. It should have. But 2 states away, a company called Aldair Systems had gotten hold of something that wasn't theirs. The Kestrel plates. That was the name of it, whispered up and down the daylight floors of Corvath like a curse. The Kestrel cooling plate designs were the company's crown jewel, years of work, the thing that had won them a contract worth $52 million. And somehow the designs had walked out the door and turned up in the hands of their biggest rival. Aldair had them. Aldair was going to stand up at a trade show in 12 days and demo Corvath's own technology as if they'd invented it. If that happened, the contract was gone. $52 million? Gone. And the men who'd signed their names to keeping it safe would go with it. The board gave Trevor Lund 9 days. 9. Find the leak, plug it, prove it, or lose the deal, and probably his chair along with it. You could smell the panic on the daylight floors after that. Yolanda smelled it the way she smelled everything. Coming in at 10 with her cart, the offices still warm from bodies that had stayed late and left afraid. Coffee gone cold in a dozen mugs. A shredder overflowing on 3. Somebody had thrown a stapler hard enough to dent the wall. Fear has a smell and a mess, and she was the one who cleaned it up. Lund put 2 people in charge of the hunt. Brenda Cole, the VP of Human Resources, a woman who wanted a name to hand the board and wanted it fast, and Grant Merrill, the Director of Corporate Security. 51, silver at the temples, suits that fit like they'd been sewn onto him. Merrill was the man who ran the cameras and the card readers and the whole nervous system of that building's security. If anybody was going to catch a thief who moved in the dark, it was supposed to be him. That's what everybody believed. That's what made it perfect. Now here's a small thing. File it away, because the people in this story never will. It was maybe a week into all of it, and Yolanda was pushing her cart down the 4th floor hallway a little past midnight, Marcus walking beside her carrying the trash bags. And she said it the way you say a thing you're barely thinking about. She said, "Mister, Merrill was up here on 4 again last night. Late funny thing." And Marcus said, "Funny how?" And she said, "His car wasn't in the lot on Tuesday. Whole night. But somebody was up on 4. And she didn't even stop walking when she said it. She reached down and pulled the liner out of the bin by the elevator and snapped a fresh one open and dropped it in, and the thought floated off her like steam, and she went on to the next bin, and that was that. You caught it. You and me. We heard it. Nobody in that building did. That little observation went into the air over her cart and dissolved, and the only place it survived was inside her head, filed with 1,000 other things she'd noticed and never mentioned. Remember it. It's going to matter more than anything a forensic consultant found in 9 days of looking. Then came the war room. You already saw the top of it. Now sit through the whole thing. They'd taken the big conference room on 5, the one with the long table and the screen that dropped from the ceiling, and they'd filled it. Executives, legal, Merrill and his people. Brenda Cole at the head of the table with a laptop open in front of her, and a look on her face like a woman who has decided the answer is simpler than the question. And Yolanda was in there, because the bins in that room got emptied every night whether there was a meeting in it or not, and nobody had thought to tell her to skip it, and nobody had thought to lower their voices for the woman with the cart. She was furniture. She was part of the room, like the chairs. Cole clicked to a slide. It was a diagram of the building, all 6 floors, with the card readers marked in little red dots. The exposure window is after hours, she said. Every server touch that matters happened between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. So we start where the after-hours access is. She looked around the table. Who's in this building at 2 in the morning? Not our engineers. Not our executives. The cleaning contractors. They have keys to every room on every floor. Most access, least oversight. We pull them first. And the heads went down and up, 14 of them nodding, and Yolanda, over by the door, lifted the small bin from beside the credenza and tipped it into her bag, and did not let her face do anything at all. Least oversight. She thought about the plant on 5 that she watered out of her own paper cup. She thought about 11 years of leaving every office exactly as she found it, minus the mess. Most access. She had the most access, that was true. She had the most access to that building of any living soul. And in the whole of it, she had never once so much as read a memo left face up on a desk. But she understood, standing there, that access and guilt were about to be treated like the same word. Then Merrill spoke, and this is the part I need you to watch. He leaned back, easy, and he said, Brenda's right. Night facilities is the obvious vector. I'll pull the contractor badge records and start building the timeline. Smooth as anything. Agreeing, helping, steering. He said night facilities like it was a machine part and not 4 human beings. One of them 19 months into a baby girl's life. And what you couldn't see yet, what Yolanda couldn't see yet either, but what she would come to understand better than she'd ever understood anything, was that the man volunteering to build the timeline was the man who needed the timeline to point anywhere but at himself. He caught her eye as she carried the bag to the door. Just for a second. He gave her a little smile, the kind you give a waitress, and he turned back to the room. She went home that morning, and she couldn't sleep. She lay in her small apartment with the blinds shut against the sun, and she stared at the ceiling, and she went over the building in her head, floor by floor, door by door, the way she sometimes did to fall asleep, except this time, it kept her awake. Because something didn't fit. She just couldn't name it yet. 2 nights later, she named part of it. It was around 2 in the morning, that dead middle of the shift when even the building seems to hold its breath, and she came to the 4th floor stairwell door with a rag in her hand to wipe the push bar the way she did every night. And it was open. Not all the way. Cracked, held that way by a little wedge of folded cardboard jammed down at the bottom hinge. The kind of thing a person makes in 10 seconds and it holds a door forever. She stood and looked at it. Now you have to understand what that door was. That stairwell door needed a badge to come in from the stairs. You could push out any time, but to come back in from the stairwell onto the 4th floor. The reader had to see your card and blink green and let you through. That was the design. That was security. And somebody had taken that whole idea and beaten it with a folded piece of cardboard. Prop it open, and a person could go up and down that stairwell all night, in and out of the 4th floor, and never once show a badge to a reader. Never leave a mark in any log. A ghost. You could bring a second person into that floor, somebody who didn't work there, somebody who never badged in at all, and let them right back out, and the building's memory would show nothing. Nothing. Yolanda crouched down and looked at that little cardboard wedge for a long time. She did not pull it out. Some instinct, older than thought, told her not to touch it. She wiped the push bar the way she always did. She stood up. She looked down the empty stairwell, listening, and heard nothing but the tick of the vent 2 floors up. And she pushed her cart on down the hall. But now she was awake in a whole new way. Only she understood what that wedge meant. Only she, and only you. Everyone else in that building was looking at badge logs to find their thief, and the thief had figured out how to walk through a door that wrote nothing down. She started paying attention on purpose after that. Not sneaking, not detective work, just watching, the way she'd always half watched, except now she turned the volume up. And she kept it to herself, because who would she tell, and who would ask? The machine, though, the machine didn't wait for her to figure anything out. The machine got hungry, and it reached for the easiest thing to swallow. And the easiest thing was a 20-year-old boy. It happened in the daylight, which was the cruelty of it. Yolanda wasn't even supposed to be there. But there'd been a plumbing thing on 3. A supervisor had called her in early to walk the day manager through where the shutoff was, and so she was in the building at 4 in the afternoon, in her street clothes, standing near the elevators on 3, when she saw them take Marcus. 2 of Merrill's security people, and Brenda Cole herself, walking a step ahead. And Marcus in the middle of them, still in his crew polo, because he'd come in early to swap a shift, looking around like a boy who's been called to the front of a class and doesn't know the question. They walked him into the glass-walled conference room right there on 3, the one with windows on the hallway, so the whole floor could see in. Engineers looked up from their desks. A woman by the printer stopped and stared. And they sat Marcus down at the table, and they left the blinds open. And Brenda Cole put a sheet of paper in front of him and started asking him about the 4th floor. Yolanda moved close enough to hear through the door that never latched right. "Your badge puts you on the 4th floor at 1:52 in the morning on the night in question," Cole said. "R&D is on 4. The files that were compromised were accessed at 2:04. Explain to me what a member of the cleaning crew was doing on the R&D floor at 2 in the morning." And Marcus, God love him, told the truth, because the truth was all he had. "There was a spill," he said. "Somebody dropped a whole coffee. Big mess, right outside the lab. Miss Yolanda sent me up to mop it before it soaked into the carpet. I was up there 10 minutes. I mopped it and I came back down." "Miss Yolanda," Cole repeated, writing it down like it was a lie. "Yes, ma'am. You can ask her." But they didn't ask her. That's the thing. Yolanda was standing 8 feet away on the other side of a door. The one person on earth who could say, "Yes, I sent that boy up. I remember the spill. It was a full 16-ounce cup, and it had gone under the door frame. I remember because I had to move the mat." She was right there. And it did not occur to a single person in that room that the woman who ran those floors might be the answer to the question they were asking. She wasn't a witness to them. She was a suspect category. Night facilities. Cole closed her folder. "Marcus, effective now, you're suspended pending review. Security will walk you out. You'll turn in your badge at the desk." The boy's face. "I won't dress it up for you." He looked at that woman, and the bottom fell out of his whole world, because that badge was a crib and a car payment and a little girl's formula, and it was being taken from him in a glass room while strangers watched through the windows, for the crime of mopping a floor when he was told to. He stood up because they told him to stand up. He didn't argue. He was too scared to argue. And they walked him out past the printers and the desks and the staring. A 20-year-old kid being marched through a building for everyone to see. And every person watching decided, right then, quietly, that they'd caught the guy. And Yolanda. Yolanda stood by her cart in the hallway, in her street clothes, and watched them take him. Her hands were shaking. She wanted to open her mouth. Everything in her, everything, screamed to step out and say, "I sent him. It was me, ask me, I know." But you have to understand what she was. She was a contractor. She was night facilities. She was the category they'd already named as the enemy. If she stepped forward and said, "I told him to go up there," what she'd be handing them, in that moment, in that mood, was not Marcus's innocence. It was her own guilt, gift-wrapped. She would not clear him. She would only join him. And then, there'd be no one left watching the doors at all. So she did the hardest thing a person can do. She stayed quiet. She held it. She let them walk him out, and she did not make a sound. And if you have ever had to swallow a truth to protect the very thing the truth was for, then you know exactly what that cost her, and you know it wasn't weakness. It was the opposite. She caught Marcus's eye just once as they passed, and she gave him the smallest nod. a nod that said, "I've got you. Not now, but I've got you." He didn't understand it. How could he? He went out the door with his head down. She finished the plumbing walkthrough. Her voice was steady. She drove home in the afternoon light with her hands tight on the wheel, and she did not cry until she was in her own kitchen with the door shut, and even then it was only for a minute, because Yolanda Reyes did not have time to fall apart. She had a building to watch. And now she had a promise to keep. Something changed in her that night. The grief went down and something harder came up in its place. Not anger exactly, resolve. She sat at her kitchen table before her shift with a cheap spiral notebook, the kind you buy 3 for $1, and she did not write a single word in it, because writing it down felt dangerous. And because she didn't need to. She had a better place to keep things. She had the place she'd kept 11 years of that building, her own head. And she began to reconstruct. Not guess. Reconstruct. She had watched those badge readers every night for 11 years without ever thinking of them as evidence. A reader blinks green when it lets you in. Granted, amber when it says no. Denied, she had seen 10,000 greens and ambers and never once cared. But she remembered them. That was the thing nobody knew about Yolanda Reyes. She remembered the small colored lights the way other people remember songs. She lay in the dark those next nights, and she walked the building backward through time. The elevator called up to the 4th floor at 2:10 on a Tuesday, when the 4th floor should have been as empty as a church. She remembered because the elevator dinging in an empty building at 2 a.m. is a sound that stays with you. The coffee cup, a real ceramic one, left on the counter of the 4th floor kitchenette one morning, still with a swallow in it, on a floor where nobody works nights and the night crew drinks from the break room downstairs. She'd washed it and thought nothing. Now she thought about it plenty. And the cologne, that sharp green cologne that hung in the 4th floor hallway some nights, the same scent that lived in a certain corner office in the daytime, the office with the silver-haired man in the good suits. It didn't belong on 4 at 2 in the morning. But some nights, it was there. And she remembered the nights Grant Merrill's car wasn't in the lot. She parked in the same corner of that lot every night for 11 years. She knew whose spots were whose. And on more than one of the very nights when something moved on the 4th floor after 2, his black car had not been in its space. He was supposed to be off-site. She'd hear it later, secondhand, the daytime gossip trickling down. Merrill was in Cincinnati that week. Cincinnati, and yet the cologne, and the elevator, and the coffee, and the green light on the 4th floor reader. She didn't have a theory yet. She wasn't a woman who leapt. But she had a pile of small true things, and the pile was starting to lean all in one direction, and the direction it leaned was toward the one man everyone trusted to point it the other way. She said nothing. She watched harder. She started to notice which readers she passed, and what color they'd last blinked, filing it, dating it, building the thing in her head that no server and no consultant and no camera would ever build, because she was the only instrument in that whole building pointed at the truth. Meanwhile, the machine ground on, and it was spending money to look everywhere except the right place. They brought in forensic consultants, men who charged more for a day than Yolanda made in 3 weeks. They set up in a conference room on 2 with 3 monitors each, and they audited the servers, and they pulled the badge summaries, and they cross-referenced access logs against file touch timestamps. And it was very impressive. And it found nothing. Because the summaries they were auditing, the neat, consolidated badge reports that showed who went where and when, were compiled and handed over by the Director of Corporate Security, by Grant Merrill. The man being investigated was the man preparing the evidence about the investigation. He gave them clean summaries because he made the summaries clean. He handed them a map with his own roads erased. And when the servers came back inconclusive, when the fancy consultants shrugged, Brenda Cole did what tired institutions always do. She went back to the answer she'd already picked. Night facilities. The contractors. She leaned harder on the crew. She pulled the rest of them in for interviews. the older man who did the ground floor and the young woman who did 7 through 9, and she asked them the same leading questions. And she wrote down their nervous answers, as if nervousness were confession. The tools of that whole investigation, the cameras and the servers and the 6-figure consultants, all pointed everywhere except at the hand that was holding them. And the hand that was holding them made very sure of that. Yolanda watched it happen. She emptied the consultants' bins on 2 and saw the printouts and understood, in her plain impatient way, exactly what was wrong with them. They were reading Meryl's version of the building. She was living in the real one. And then, one night deep in that stretch, she saw the whole thing. Not a piece. The whole shape of it, laid out in front of her like a floor she'd finally finished mopping. It was late, past 2 again, and she'd learned by then to move quiet and stay in the dark spots. She was in the 4th floor supply alcove, that little recess by the janitor's closet where the light doesn't reach, restocking paper towels, when she heard the R&D door open down the hall. She stayed still, and she watched Grant Merrill come out of R&D. His own badge had let him in there, she was sure. Green light, all proper, all logged. A director has every right to walk into R&D. But then she watched him do the thing the logs would never show. He walked to the 4th floor stairwell door. He pushed it open, and he crouched and set the little folded cardboard wedge at the bottom hinge, propping it from the inside. And a minute later, a man she'd never seen came up those stairs. No badge, no light, nothing, carrying a soft courier bag. And the 2 of them spoke too low to hear. And the courier went back down the prop door with the bag heavier than it came, and left the building through a stairwell that wrote down nothing. And Merrill pulled the wedge and let the door click shut and walked back to R&D like a man who'd stepped out for water. There it was, the badge that lit R&D, legitimate, logged, his by right. The prop door, invisible, that turned a legitimate visit into a highway for a ghost. The courier who was never in the building, as far as the building knew. Yolanda stood in the dark of that alcove, with a stack of paper towels in her arms, and she held, in her head, the entire machine of it. The whole pattern, and she understood something that made her go cold and still. Marcus's badge on the 4th floor at 152 was a boy mopping a spill. Merrill's badge on the 4th floor was a director doing his job. On paper, the boy looked guiltier, because the boy had no reason to be there, and the director had every reason. The logs read the ordinary way, damned the innocent, and cleared the guilty. It took someone who'd watched the actual door, with actual eyes, to see it backward and true. She didn't move for a long time. When she finally did, she finished stocking the towels, because that was her job, and her job was her cover, and her dignity both. And she made a decision, standing there in the dark. She wasn't going to whisper this to a coworker. She wasn't going to leave an anonymous note. Those would die the way her observation over the cart had died. There was exactly one man in that building who had the power to act, and might, just might, be desperate enough to listen. Trevor Lund. The man who'd stepped over her cord. She would have to find her way to the one person who'd never seen her, and make him see all of it. But not yet. First she had to be certain, in the one way she trusted, which was with her own eyes, and no doubt left in her at all. So she did the thing that turned her from a woman who noticed into a woman who knew. She got to the 4th floor early the next night, before 2, while the building still had a few stragglers finishing up on other floors. And she went to the stairwell door. And she reached down, and this time she took the cardboard wedge out. She pulled it free, and she folded it into her apron pocket. And then she stepped back into the dark of the supply alcove, and she set down her cart. And she waited. Just waited. In the dark. A 59-year-old woman standing dead still by a janitor's closet at 2 in the morning, watching a door, her heart going harder than she'd have liked to admit. The vent 2 floors up went tick, tick, tick. The building held its breath. And at 8 minutes past 2, she heard it. The stairwell door handle turned. From the inside, on the 4th floor, someone pushed the bar and swung the door open, exactly as before. And then, From down in the stairwell, a hand pulled at the door to come back through, the way the courier always did. Except this time, the door wasn't propped. This time, there was no cardboard wedge holding it kind. The door started to swing shut on its own weight, the way that fourth-floor door always did when nothing held it. And the man in the stairwell caught it a second too late. And it stuck, half closed, on the bad latch that Yolanda had known about for 11 years. And in the dark, she heard a man curse. Soft and low and furious. Not the courier, the other voice. The one that in daylight called her sweetheart. She heard Grant Merrill mutter a word he'd never say in a meeting, and she heard him step over and shove the door back open and crouch down, feeling along the bottom hinge for the wedge that wasn't there. She heard him pat the floor. She heard the small, confused silence of a man who cannot find a thing he is certain he left. And then she heard him take something else, a folded bit of paper maybe, and jam it in himself, and hiss into the stairwell, "Go now." And the courier went down, and the bag went with him. Out through a door that remembered nothing. Yolanda didn't breathe. She stood in the dark 8 feet from him with the real wedge folded in her apron pocket, and she watched him prop that door with a second scrap, and let his ghost out into the night, and she confirmed, with her own 2 eyes, in her own 2 hands, every single piece of it. This was not a guess anymore. This was not a pile of small true things leaning one way. This was a floor she'd mopped clean. She knew. Merrill stood up. He straightened his jacket in the dark, and for one terrible second, he turned his head toward the alcove, toward the deeper black, where she stood among the paper towels with her heart in her throat, and he seemed to look right at her. She did not move. She did not breathe. She was, after all, very good at being invisible. 11 years of practice. He looked at nothing, saw nothing, a category of person he trained himself not to see, and he turned and walked back down the hall toward R&D, and his sharp green cologne trailed behind him in the dark, and the fourth-floor reader was going to show, in the morning, that Director Grant Merrill had legitimately badged out at a reasonable hour. A man above suspicion. A man running the very hunt for the thief he was. Yolanda Reyes stood alone in the dark a long moment after he was gone. Then she took the folded cardboard wedge out of her apron pocket and looked at it in her palm. This stupid little scrap that a whole $52 million security apparatus had never even seen, and that she had just used to catch the man they trusted to catch everyone else. She closed her hand around it. 9 days the board had given Lund. She didn't know how many were left. She only knew that a boy was suspended with a baby at home, and a crew wore the name of thieves, and the one person in that building who understood what was really happening was a woman nobody had ever thought to ask a single question. She was going to have to make Trevor Lund ask. She picked up her cart. She wiped the push bar on the stairwell door, the way she did every night, out of habit, out of dignity, even now. And somewhere below her, out in the dark parking lot she knew better than her own street, a courier bag with another company's future in it was pulling out of a space that should have been empty. She didn't know yet how she'd get into that man's office. She didn't know if he'd listen, or laugh, or call security, which would mean calling Merrill himself. She only knew what she'd seen, and she knew that time was running out for everyone but the guilty. The vent up on 6 went tick, 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 and Yolanda pushed her cart on down the empty hall, toward the elevator, toward whatever came next, carrying in her head the one map that could save them all, if she could only get a single powerful man to look down, for once, and see the woman who'd been standing in his building the whole time. The morning after she caught him, Yolanda Reyes did not sleep. She lay in her small apartment with the blinds drawn against the daylight and the cardboard wedge on the kitchen table beside the spiral notebook she had never written in. She looked at both of them for a long time. The notebook was still blank. She had bought it weeks ago, thinking she might set things down, and then she had understood that a written page could be found, could be taken, could be turned against the one who wrote it. So she kept the map where no one could subpoena it. In her head. Behind her plain, tired face that 14 executives had learned to look straight through. She got up when the light went gold in the afternoon. She made coffee. She did not call anyone. Because who was there to call? The security desk was Merrill's. The investigation was Cole's. And Marcus, poor Marcus, 20 years old with a baby 19 months old at home, was suspended and sitting in his mother's kitchen, waiting for a machine to decide his life. She could not go to any of them. She could only go up. Straight to the top. To the one man with the power to pull the thread, and no reason yet to protect the thief. She had to make Trevor Lund ask her a question. That night she came in at 10 the way she always had. 10 at night until 6 in the morning, and she pushed her cart out of the supply room and she started her floors. Floors 2 through 6. 11 years of the same route. And on the 4th floor, at a little past midnight, she stopped at the badge reader by the stairwell, and she stood there a moment too long, just looking at it, reading it, the way another person reads a page. Something interesting on that wall, sweetheart? She did not jump. She had trained herself out of jumping years ago, but her stomach went cold. Grant Merrill stood at the end of the hall. 51 years old, silver hair combed back, the cologne reaching her a full second before he did. He was smiling. He had a way of smiling that never touched the top half of his face. Just wiping it down, Yolanda said. She lifted her cloth. They get greasy. Everybody's thumbs. Do they? He came closer. He looked at the reader, then at her, then back at the reader, and she watched him do the arithmetic behind his eyes. Watched him wonder exactly how much a cleaning woman could possibly know about a little green light. You know, he said. I've been looking at the route sheets. The 4th floor. R&D's a sensitive area right now, what with everything going on. We're going to take it off your rotation. Day crew will handle it. Nothing personal. Just tightening things up. Of course, Yolanda said. Wouldn't want anyone getting the wrong idea about who's up here at night. He said it soft. Almost kind. It was a threat wearing a cardigan. You understand. I understand, Mr. Merrill. Good girl. He patted the reader like it was a dog. Then he walked to the elevator, and the doors closed on him, and the cologne stayed behind in the hall like a stain. Yolanda stood very still. She understood. All right. She understood he had just tried to blind the one eye in the building he couldn't buy or reroute. Take her off the floor. And there was no witness left. Just the boy's badge and the doctored summaries, and a story that ended with Marcus Bellow's name on a termination form. She finished the 4th floor anyway. She wiped every surface. She left the reader gleaming. And she memorized the hall one more time. Every door, every angle. In case it was the last night she'd ever stand in it. She found Marcus 2 days later, out in the parking lot after the day shift, because he'd come to drop off his access card the way HR had told him to. He looked 10 years older than 20. He had the baby's picture as the screen on his cracked phone. Miss Yolanda, he said, and his voice broke on it, and he was ashamed of that, and she pretended not to see. They think I did it. They really think I walked out of here with, I don't even know what it was. I was mopping. You told me to go mop the spill. I was mopping. I know you were, she said. I sent you. They won't listen. I told them you sent me, and they looked at me like, he stopped. Like, I was making you up. Yolanda put her hand on his arm, work-hardened hand, 59 years old, steady as a table. Listen to me, she said. You say nothing more to anybody. Not one more word. Not to Cole, not to security, not to anyone who calls you on the phone. You don't defend yourself. You don't argue. You go home to that baby and you wait. But if I don't say anything, they'll just, Marcus. She waited until his eyes came up to hers. I am going to fix this. Do you hear me? I know what happened in that building. I know it the way I know my own hands. And I am going to put it in front of the one man who can undo it. You have to trust me for a few more days. Can you do that? He looked at her, this tired woman who emptied the trash. And something in her face, the absolute flatness of it, the way she said it like she was reporting the weather, made him believe her when he'd stopped believing anyone. Yes, ma'am, he said. Go home, she said. Kiss your baby. She watched him drive off in a car that needed a muffler. Then she went inside to be told she was fired. Not fired, exactly. Meryl was smoother than that. When she badged in that night, the reader flashed amber. Denied. She tried again. Amber, the little light that had been green for 11 years, 10 at night until 6 in the morning, had gone the color of a stop sign. Her contractor badge had been pulled from the active list. A keystroke. Somewhere in a warm office, the director of corporate security had reached into a database and erased her from the building, the way you'd wipe a smudge off glass. The night security guard at the desk, a kid who didn't know anything, shrugged at her. System saying you're inactive, Miss Reyes. I can't override it. You want I should call somebody? No, Yolanda said. Don't call anybody. Because the only somebody he could call was Meryl. She stood outside the glass doors of Corvath Dynamics at 10 o'clock at night for the first time in 11 years, locked out of the only place she knew better than her own street. And she felt, for one moment, the whole weight of it. The machine that could disappear a person with a keystroke, that could make a boy a thief with a badge log. That could take a woman who had done nothing but her job for over a decade and simply switch her off. For one moment. Then she got very calm. Because a man doesn't lock a door unless there's something behind it he's afraid you'll see. Meryl had just told her, louder than anything, that she was right, that she was the danger, that the map in her head was worth more than the $52 million everyone was running around trying to save. She could not get in. Fine, she would get in the front way, in daylight, through the one door Meryl couldn't lock. It was the 8th day. Day 8 of the 9 the board had given Trevor Lund. Up on the top floor, in a corner office with a view of the whole technology park. Trevor Lund sat with a report in front of him and a pen in his hand and the worst feeling of his life in his chest. Brenda Cole stood across the desk, 44 years old, sharp suit, the particular confidence of someone who has decided the answer and now only needs the signature. Grant and I are aligned on this, Cole was saying. The forensics came back clean on the servers, no external breach. Which means it walked out the door physically, and the access logs put the night crew on the relevant floors on the relevant nights. Bellow's badge is on for the night the Kestrel files moved. We recommend termination of the overnight facilities contract and cooperation with law enforcement regarding Bellow specifically. A 20-year-old kid, Lund said. A 20-year-old kid with the access, the opportunity, and the badge trail. Cole set a second page in front of him. I don't love it either, Trevor, but the board wants a culprit tomorrow. And this is the defensible one. This is the one that holds up. Lund looked at the form. His pen hovered over the line. One signature, and he'd have his answer for the board. One signature, and the machine would eat a mopping boy, and Aldair Systems would demo the Kestrel plates at the trade show in 12 days anyway, and none of it would come back, and he'd have fired the innocent to buy himself a story. His secretary's voice came over the desk phone. Mr. Lund? I'm sorry. There's a woman here. From the cleaning crew. She says she has to talk to you about the leak. Before you sign anything, she says you'll want to hear it first. Cole's face closed like a door. Absolutely not. Trevor, that's exactly the kind of interference. She's crew. She's compromised. She's probably here to cover for Bellow. Lund was tired. Lund had not slept in 8 days. And something in the phrasing, before you sign anything, landed on the exact fear he'd been sitting in for an hour. Send her in, he said. Trevor, Brenda, send her in. What's 5 minutes? The door opened, and Yolanda Reyes walked into the office of the man whose wastebasket she had emptied for 11 years. And he had, in all that time, never once looked at her long enough to know her face. She wore her own clothes. She held her hands in front of her. She was 59 years old, and she had rehearsed nothing. Because the truth doesn't need rehearsing, it only needs a room. "Mr. Lund," she said. "My name is Yolanda Reyes. I clean floors 2 through 6. I have for 11 years. 10 at night until 6 in the morning." She paused. "I know who took your designs, and I can tell you exactly how they got out of the building without a single badge lighting up wrong. But you have to let me talk longer than 5 minutes, because it's going to sound impossible until it doesn't." Cole made a sound. Trevor, this is a contractor under active suspicion coming into." "I'm not under suspicion," Yolanda said quietly. "My badge got turned off 2 nights ago by your director of corporate security. He also took the 4th floor off my route last week, and he called me sweetheart while he did it." You might ask yourself why a man that busy, with $52 million on fire, found the time to personally worry about where the cleaning lady mops. She looked at Lund. "I'd ask myself that, if I were you." The room went quiet. Lund set the pen down. "Sit," he said. She didn't sit. She stood. Because standing was how she'd learned the building, on her feet in the dark, and she began to talk. Not fast, not pleading. The flat, even voice of a woman reading something she'd read 1,000 times. "The night the Kestrel files moved," she said. "You've got Marcus Bellow's badge on the 4th floor at 1:52 in the morning. That's true. His badge was there. Because I sent him. There was a spill in the kitchenette on 4. A whole pot of coffee somebody left and knocked over. And I don't send a boy to clean a floor that isn't on his sheet without a reason. And the reason was the spill, and if you go look, the readers will show his badge went to 4 and came straight back down inside 11 minutes. That's not a thief. A thief lingers. That's a boy with a mop." "Everyone had a badge somewhere," Cole said. "That proves nothing. I'm not done." Yolanda didn't raise her voice. "The 4th floor has a stairwell door. Requires a badge to come in. Doesn't require one to leave. Fire code, you just push the bar. For weeks now that door's been propped. Somebody wedged a folded piece of cardboard down in the bottom hinge, so the latch never catches. So a person can come up the stairs from outside and walk onto the 4th floor without ever touching a reader. No badge event, no green light, nothing for your consultants to find." Because the door was already open, Lund had gone very still. Every 3rd night or so, she went on, there'd be a fresh coffee cup on the 4th floor kitchenette counter. 1 swallow left in it, on a floor where nobody works nights. Nobody, my crew doesn't drink up there, I'd know. I empty the trash. So somebody was up on 4 in the dark, drinking coffee. On nights the building was supposed to be empty. And I could tell you who. Because I could smell him. Same cologne every time. The same cologne that walks into this building every morning on Grant Merrill. That's, Cole started. On 4 separate nights, Yolanda said, and now she was counting them off on her fingers, slow, the elevator got called up to 4 at 2:10 in the morning. 2:04, some nights. 8 minutes past 2, others right around the same time. Every time. And on at least 2 of those nights, Mr. Merrill's own security schedule had him logged off-site. In Cincinnati. But the reader on the 4th floor R&D door lit up green under his badge while he was supposed to be 2 states away. I watched it turn green. I was standing there with my cart. A man can't be in Cincinnati and on the 4th floor at the same time. But his badge was. Because he was. The silence in the room had a texture now. And 12 days ago, Yolanda said, I saw the whole thing at once, from start to finish. Mr. Merrill badged into R&D. Legitimate, his director's badge, all above board, a green light any auditor would smile at. Then he walked to the stairwell and propped the door from the inside with that cardboard. And a few minutes later, a man I'd never seen came up those stairs and went in, and came back out carrying a courier bag and left down the stairwell and out to the lot. And not one reader in this building recorded a thing, because the one door that mattered was held open by a scrap of cardboard the size of a matchbook. Your $52 million security never even saw it. I've been folding it back the right way for weeks, and it kept coming back. Lund's voice was rough. Why should I believe a word of this? You're describing things no camera caught, because no camera was pointed at them. Yolanda looked at him, and this was the thing she'd carried up in the elevator, the sentence she'd been saving. You watch the cameras, Mr. Lund. I watch the people. A camera only sees where somebody decided to point it. And the man who decided where to point them is the same man you put in charge of finding the thief. Nobody spoke. There's one more thing, she said. I took the cardboard. 6 nights ago, I pulled it out early, and I hid in the supply alcove on 4, and I waited in the dark. And at 8 minutes past 2, the stairwell door tried to open, and it stuck, because the latch caught, because I'd taken the wedge. And I heard a man out on the stairs curse. And then I heard Mr. Merrill's footsteps come across the 4th floor from the R&D side, and I heard him wedge that door open again, from the inside, and let his courier out. He was 8 feet from me. He never knew I was there. And then he badged out at a decent hour like an honest man. She reached into her coat and set the folded scrap of cardboard on Trevor Lund's desk, on top of Marcus Bellow's termination form. That's the wedge. That's your $52 million. It fit in my apron pocket the whole time. For a long moment, Lund just looked at the little folded thing sitting on the paper. Then he picked up his phone. Get me at security, he said. Not Merrill's team, the forensic consultants directly. I want the raw badge reader logs. The readers themselves, not the summaries anyone compiled for us. Every reader on the 4th and 5th floors, every event, time-stamped, for the last 30 days. And I want it in this room in 20 minutes. Cole had gone pale. Trevor, if you're wrong about Grant, then the raw logs will say I'm wrong, Lund said, and we'll all feel foolish, and I'll apologize to a good man. But if she's right, Brenda. He looked at the form under the cardboard, at the name he'd almost signed. If she's right, I was about to fire a kid to protect the man who did it. So we're going to look. We're going to look at the numbers she can't have touched. They pulled the raw logs, not the tidy summaries, not the clean spreadsheets Grant Merrill's office had been handing up the chain for 9 days, sanitized, sorted, arranged to point everywhere but at himself. The raw feed, the dumb, honest memory of the readers themselves, the little machines on the walls that recorded every badge without any opinion about whose it was. And it was all there. Every anomaly the cleaning woman had recited from memory, standing in that office with her hands folded, printed itself out in cold data. Marcus Bellow's badge on the 4th floor at 1:52 in the morning, and gone again 11 minutes later, exactly as she'd said. The mop, not the theft. The 4th floor stairwell reader showing long gaps where the door should have logged exits and logged nothing at all. The propped open windows, the phantom comings and goings. And Grant Merrill's director badge, lighting the R&D reader green at 2 in the morning, at 2:04, at 10 past 2, on the very nights his own security schedule swore he was off-site in Cincinnati. The greens she remembered, printed in the data. To the minute, a young consultant scrolled through it, faster and faster, his face changing. These match, he said. These all match. Every timestamp she gave you is in here. How did she gave you these from memory? Yes, Lund said. That's not possible. And yet, Lund said quietly, looking at Yolanda Reyes, who had not moved, here they are. He stood up. He looked older than he had that morning, and somehow lighter at the same time. Brenda, he said, reconvene the war room. Everyone who was in it the first day. Every executive who nodded when we agreed to pull the cleaning crew first. I want the same room and the same faces. And I want Grant Merrill in it, sitting where he sat when he volunteered to run this hunt. He paused. And call our security team, the officers, not the director. Have 2 of them wait outside that room. Don't tell them why. The war room filled the way it had on the first day. 14 executives, the same suits, the same long table, the same wall of screens. Brenda Cole took her seat and did not look at anyone. Trevor Lunn stood at the head of the table. And Grant Merrill came in last, unhurried, silver hair combed back, cologne arriving before he did. And he took his chair with the easy authority of the man running the investigation. And he set down a leather folder, and he smiled his smile that never reached the top of his face. "Trevor," he said, "you wanted a briefing? I'll tell you. I think we're finally close. The badge trail on the Bellow kid is about as clean a case as—" "Put it up," Lund said to the consultant. The screen came alive. On the left, Grant Merrill's summaries, the clean-sorted spreadsheets his office had produced. On the right, the raw reader logs, straight off the machines. And between them, highlighted in a red that filled the darkened room, the rows that did not match. The R&D door lit green at 2:10 on nights. The summary said the floor was dark. A badge that was supposed to be in Cincinnati, printing itself onto the 4th floor over and over, its owner's name in plain letters beside every timestamp. Merrill, G. The room was silent. 14 executives, reading. Yolanda Reyes stood against the back wall, by the door, next to a cart that wasn't there, in the exact spot where she'd emptied the bin 9 days ago and heard her own crew named as thieves. Nobody had told her to stand there. It was simply where she stood. Grant Merrill looked at the screen for a long time, and the audience of the whole room watched his face do the thing a face does when the ground goes out from under it. First the contempt, the flick of the eyes that said, "This is beneath me. This is a mistake. This will be cleared up." Then, as the red rows kept scrolling and his own name kept appearing beside them, the contempt drained off and left behind a different thing entirely. A stillness. The specific, terrible stillness of a man running down every exit in a building he designed and finding each one already closed. "These are doctored," he said. His voice was still smooth. "Barely someone's manipulated the raw feed to." "The consultants pulled them," Lund said. "Off the readers directly. Your office never touched these." "That's the point, Grant. These are the ones you couldn't get to." Merrill's jaw worked. And then he made the mistake that men like him always make. He looked for the smallest person in the room to blame. "That woman," he said. And he pointed, actually lifted his hand, and pointed at Yolanda Reyes standing by the door. "That's a cleaning contractor with a grudge. I pulled her badge for cause. She's been snooping around a secure floor for weeks, I have it documented, and now she comes running to you with some fantasy because she's about to lose a contract. She has a grudge. That's all this is." "That's all she." Trevor Lund slid the printout across the long table. It traveled the whole polished length of it and stopped in front of Grant Merrill, and it spun a little as it stopped. And on it were the rows with his name, and Lund did not say a single word. The room watched Grant Merrill look down at his own name. 14 executives, and the CEO, and the woman by the door. And Grant Merrill, 51 years old, director of corporate security, the man who had audited every badge in the building, stopped talking, because there was nothing left to say that the readers hadn't already said about him. "The officers are outside," Grant, Lund said gently. "Your officers. Let's not do this the ugly way." And Grant Merrill, who had chosen this exact room to steer the hunt, who had sat at this exact table and volunteered to catch the thief, stood up in it and had nothing. The stillness held. Then he buttoned his jacket, the reflex of a lifetime of composure, a small absurd dignity, and he walked to the door where 2 of his own security officers stood waiting. And he did not look at the woman he'd called sweetheart as he passed her, because he could not. Brenda Cole sat very still in her chair. She was looking at the report in front of her. Her own report, the one recommending termination of the night crew, cooperation with law enforcement regarding Bellow specifically. The one Lund had nearly signed. It sat on the table in the silence, and everyone in the room could see it sitting there. and she could not make it disappear. And the signature line at the bottom was blank, and would stay blank, and that blank line was the loudest thing in the room. She had spent 9 days looking for someone without the standing to fight back. She had found the boy. She had found the crew. She had built the case and handed up the pen. And she had never once, in 9 days, looked up the org chart instead of down it. "Brenda," Lund said, not unkindly. "We'll talk later." She nodded. She didn't trust her voice. Lund turned to the room. "The contract stands," he said. "We have the timeline now, dates, mechanism, the whole chain of how the Kestrel designs left this building. Legal moves tonight to block Aldair's demo. We can prove the theft, and we can prove when, and we can prove who. Aldair's not showing our cooling plates at any trade show in 12 days or ever. He let that settle over the 14 faces. And I want it on the record, in this room, in front of everyone who was here on day 1, the night facilities crew is cleared. Fully, there will be no termination. There will be an apology. And it will come from me." Then he did a thing that surprised the room. He walked out of it. Down the hall, into the outer office, past the desks, to the corner where a young man's employee file sat flag suspended, pending review. And he found the record for Bello, Marcus, 20 years old, and he cleared the flag himself, with his own hands, standing up, because he wanted to be the one who did it. The same badge log that had nearly ended the boy now cleared him, line for line, on the floor at 1:52, gone by 2:03. A mop and a bucket in 11 minutes, exactly as the cleaning woman had said. He came back into the war room. Yolanda Reyes was still standing by the door, and Trevor Lund stopped in front of her. He looked at her, really looked, the way he had never once looked in 11 years of stepping over her vacuum cord with a phone against his ear. He looked at the blue lanyard around her neck, at the laminated card hanging from it. He'd seen 10,000 of them and read none. He read this one now. Facilities, contractor, and under it, smaller the name. "Reyes, why Yolanda?" he said, carefully getting it right. "Reyes, yes sir," she said. "I've walked past you for 11 years. Yes sir," she said. "You have." He didn't know what to do with that. There wasn't anything to do with it. It was just true, and she'd said it the way she said everything, flat and without a barb, and it landed harder than any accusation could have. He put out his hand. She looked at it a moment. Then she shook it, once, work-hardened hand to soft one, and she let go. She did not gloat. She did not look at Cole, sitting wrecked in her chair. She did not look at the door Merrill had gone out of. She simply reached down for the handle of a cart that was down the hall in a supply closet, remembered it wasn't there, and folded her hands again. "If it's all the same to you," she said, "I've got floors to do tonight, assuming my badge works again." "It'll work," Lund said. "It'll work for anything in this building you want to open." 4 months later, the tower ran the way it always had at 2 in the morning. The vents ticked. The building breathed its empty nighttime breath, floors 2 through 6 dark and humming. And Yolanda Reyes moved through it the way she always had, because she had chosen to stay on nights, because the nights were hers and always had been. Some things were different now. On the 5th floor, on the windowsill outside the accounting suite, the pothos plant was thriving, long green vines down the wall. She still watered it every 3rd night, the way she always had, the only living thing in the building that had ever needed her and known it. On the 4th floor, the stairwell door latched properly now. She'd made sure of that herself. And the badge reader beside it, the one she used to stop and read like a page, had her name on the access list. Not facilities, contractor anymore. A new card on the blue lanyard, a new title beside her name that hadn't existed before, that Trevor Lund had invented, because there wasn't a word for what she did, and the building needed one. Overnight security liaison. The job they made for the only person who had ever really watched the doors. Down in the break room between floors, Marcus Bello sat at the table with a textbook open and a highlighter in his hand, studying between the two classes he was taking. 20 years old, and back on the crew, and back on his feet. The baby's picture, still the screen on a phone, with a new, uncracked case. He looked up when she passed. "Miss Yolanda," he said, "you want coffee?" "I made a pot. A whole pot. I did not spill it." "Watch yourself," she said, and the corner of her mouth moved, which for her was a laugh. She poured a cup. She stood a moment at the dark window with it, looking out over Halstead Technology Park, the low lights of the other buildings, the empty lot she knew better than her own street. Grant Merrill was gone. Under indictment, the lawyers said, the case built on the raw logs and the timeline, and a folded piece of cardboard that sat in an evidence bag now instead of an apron pocket. The man who had audited every badge in the building had forgotten one thing. The readers remembered him too. They'd remembered him the whole time, patient and dumb and honest on their walls, waiting for someone to think to ask them the plain question instead of the clever one. Brenda Cole had kept her job, barely, quieter now. She'd spent 9 days hunting for someone without the standing to blame, and she had never looked up. Somewhere in there was a lesson she was still learning to sit with. And Yolanda Reyes finished her coffee and rinsed the cup and set it in the rack. Because you leave a place the way you'd want to find it. She picked up her cart. The wheel still squeaked. She'd never bothered to fix it. The squeak was how the building knew she was coming. Some people know a place so well that they become part of how it stands. You could walk past a woman like that for 11 years and never see her. Or you could be the kind of person who finally looks down and asks and finds out that the most powerful thing in the whole $52 million tower had been standing quietly in the dark the entire time, holding the one map that mattered, waiting for a single person to ask her what she knew. Be the kind of person who asks. The vent on 6 went tick, 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 and Yolanda pushed her cart on down the empty hall, toward the elevator, toward the 4th floor and its honest door. A woman finally seen in the building she'd always known by heart. Comment the city you're watching from. I'd like to know how far this one travels.